Bienvenido a la ASERSA Open Webinar Series 17, un espacio organizado por ASERSA y por aguasresiduales.info, donde una edición más volvemos a poner en valor la regeneración y la reutilización del agua, en esta ocasión con un evento especial sobre California. Buenas tardes para los que nos seguís desde España y Portugal y buenos días para los que lo hacéis desde América Latina y gracias a todos por vuestra asistencia. Como siempre, antes de dar paso a Rafael Mujeriego, presidente de ASERSA, para que nos presente a los invitados de hoy, permitidme que os comente que la webinar de esta tarde cuenta con dos verdaderos especialistas a nivel mundial sobre la materia, que a continuación nos presentará Rafael a ambos. La webinar está compuesta de un primer bloque donde conoceremos la evaluación de riesgos y el marco regulatorio de la calidad del agua para la reutilización potable directa e indirecta en California, con la empresa Trussell Technologies, y un segundo bloque donde veremos la aplicación práctica de las regulaciones de reutilización potable de California en el proyecto del sistema de reposición de agua subterránea. Esto lo veremos con los responsables del distrito de agua del condado de Orange, también en California. Ambos bloques tendrán una duración aproximada de unos 40 minutos cada uno y a la finalización de cada bloque abriremos un espacio de dudas y consultas que nos podréis ir dejando, como siempre, en la pestaña de preguntas. Os recuerdo que las ponencias de hoy son en inglés, sin traducción, y le hemos pedido a nuestros invitados que, por favor, hablen de forma clara y pausada. Mi compañera Tina estará coordinando el chat para cualquier cosa que necesitéis durante la tarde, y el material de hoy lo tenéis, como siempre, en la pestaña de App, en Compartir Medios. Y ya sin más, doy paso a Rafael Mujeriego, presidente de ASERSA, para que nos presente a los invitados de hoy. Rafael, buenas tardes. Adelante. Activa, por favor, el micrófono.
Buenas tardes, José Miguel. Es un placer estar de nuevo con vosotros, con nuestros invitados en este nuevo webinario y toda esta audiencia fiel que nos ha venido atendiendo durante todos estos ya 4 años. Yo voy a ser muy breve, voy a hacer una breve presentación en inglés para atender la capacidad de comprensión de nuestros invitados y el texto aparecerá en español aquí en la pantalla. Sin más dilación, permítanme que les diga buenos días y buenas tardes a toda nuestra audiencia. Welcome, good morning and good afternoon to all our audience. Welcome to the ASERSA webinar number 17. Thank you for joining us in this new webinar, the third of the ASERSA Open Webinar Series 2023. The main objective of this seminar is to share and disseminate the most diverse initiatives that are taking place to promote water reclamation and reuse as an essential component of the integrated management of water resources. We must congratulate ourselves for the favorable welcome that technical terms such as water reclamation, reclaimed water, water reuse, and even water purification are receiving in our territories. We will continue promoting the use to ensure a correct perception and a more extensive acceptance of these management strategies by water users and the public at large. The ASERSA webinar number 17 has been possible thanks to the continued support of our 5 sponsor members: the Catalan Water Agency, Aigües de Barcelona, the Consorci d'Aigües Costa Brava Girona, the Sanitation Agency of the Murcia region, Veolia Spain, and all of our regular members. The interest and support offered by numerous friends, colleagues, and professionals from the water reclamation and reuse field have been equally valuable. All of them have been willing to share their knowledge and experience with us on how to plan, implement, and operate their water reuse projects under the most diverse environmental, social, and economic conditions. Today's webinar includes 2 distinguished guest speakers, experts in developing and applying water quality criteria for indirect and direct potable reuse. Dr. Shane Trussell, President of Trussell Technologies, Inc., a very prestigious consulting engineering company in California that provides innovative, safe, and sustainable solutions in water, wastewater, reclaimed water, and desalinated water to his customers and partners, with offices in Auckland, Pasadena, and San Diego. Jason Dadakis, Executive Director of Water Quality and Technical Resources in Orange County Water District, the public agency providing water supply in Orange County and in charge of operating the growing GWRS project, putting together water supply and sanitation agencies that since 2008 has been producing reclaimed water for Orange County aquifer covered by 75,000 hectares, where 3 million people live. Our warmest welcome to our 2 guest speakers. We are excited to learn about the vision of Dr. Shane Trussell on the methodology followed for decades by state and regional agencies and water reuse promoters in California to develop, define, and approve the water quality criteria and the acceptable risks associated with indirect potable reuse since 2014, and direct potable reuse in the coming years as a way to confront drought episodes affecting California since 2012. We are also excited to hear Jason Dadakis on the practical ways that California regulations for potable water reuse have been implemented by the biggest and most emblematic water reuse project in the world, the groundwater replenishment system, in operation since 2008 and currently producing 500,000 cubic meters per day, half a cubic hectometer per day of advanced reclaimed water. We are convinced that our 2 guest speakers' knowledge and experimental work will promote the implementation of potable and non-potable water reuse in our territories and those of our audience. And that's basically my presentation, Jose Miguel. It's a great pleasure to have here with us Shane Trussell. And in a few minutes, we'll have also Jason Dadakis, who is trying to connect to us. So without any further delay, Jason, welcome to ASERSA webinar. You have the floor, please.
Buenas tardes, good morning. Maybe we can bring up the presentation. Excellent. There we go. Yeah, pleasure to be here with you this morning. I'm going to be framing up all the work that's been happening in California, really around the development of potable reuse. But one of the things that's occurring that's giving everyone a lot of confidence are the regulatory definitions and the science behind those regulatory requirements that's really causing potable reuse to really expand in California right now. So why are we so interested in potable reuse in California? Very similar to many of you. We're facing a changing climate. We need to adapt to it. We need to develop local sustainable supplies, things that you have control of that are renewable and a local source. Water supply certainty, ensuring that water is there as droughts and other events occur. There's still water that makes up a portion of your supply that's there for the community. And importantly, cost control. One of the big things that's happening in California is, as Jason's project has become more and more mature and everybody's seeing it operate, the Orange County Water District project, everyone now feels really good about costs and understands it. And our costs of water is rising in California significantly. So that these reuse projects also are a cost-effective solution for us. As mentioned by Raphael, California has been practicing potable reuse for a long time. I'm showing here a picture of some spreading basins. This is known as the Montebello Forebay Project. It began operating in 1962. It's a joint project between the Water Replenishment District of Southern California and Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. It replenishes the groundwater basin with more than 150 million liters per day. It's utilizing infrastructure that's really there to manage storm flow from a river and try to get that water into the groundwater basin and replenish storm flows. And so when there's no rain, which that makes up much of the time in California, they began using this infrastructure to get the tertiary treated wastewater into the ground in 1962. So this type of potable reuse depends on Mother Nature, soil aquifer treatment, to do a lot of the removal of pathogens and chemicals of concern. And it requires that there be a project boundary. So you see we have a disinfected, filtered, recycled water. It gets put in the impoundment. It's making its way into the groundwater basin. And so for these projects to be safe, it's a defined region that you're not allowed to have a drinking water well, because the state is looking for treatment to occur in the natural environment. That's referred to as spreading in California. If you want to inject the recycled water into the ground, we've always required advanced treatment. I'm showing an old picture here of what was known as Water Factory 21. It's the facility prior to the large GWRS facility that's there now. But just historically, the regulators always wanted to see more. If we wanted to inject it into the groundwater basin and kind of bypass the treatment of nature and get closer to the groundwater aquifer itself, the drinking water, there's always been a requirement for more and additional treatment. One of the big changes that came along was the advent of integrated membrane systems. So this changed the previous picture I showed, where we had line treatment and filtration ahead of membranes. We began to see integrated membrane systems, so membrane filtration, whether that's microfiltration or ultrafiltration, as pre-treatment to reverse osmosis. So with the advent of this in the late 90s, much more cost-effective treatment process, much more reliable RO operations, and our opportunities to reuse wastewater went up exponentially. Those are the groundwater projects in California. We also have indirect potable reuse regulations for surface water augmentation. I'm showing here a picture of San Vicente Reservoir in California. Clearly a very large reservoir. You would need, in California, they have definitions over how big the reservoir needs to be, and it's related to the flow into the reservoir of recycled water. They would prefer a detention time, an average detention time of 6 months as a minimum, but they will allow you to go down to 2 months. So they're looking for a very large impoundment to provide some effective dilution and protect the effluent from any sort of variability that may occur in the advanced treatment performance. One of the things that's happening now is, and I'm about to show this timeline, we have direct potable reuse regulations. There's been a lot of research money that's been generated. A lot of research has been performed. I'll be talking about much of that today. And as a result, in California, we have formal guidance. It's about 60 pages long on how to do direct potable reuse. This language is available publicly, and it's essentially in its final form at this point. There will be no more changes, and it's going to be adopted by the end of this year. They're working to move that through. So a little bit about what's been going on in California. In addition to projects, we've had, really it's driven by the utilities. Senate Bill 918 there on the far left back in 2010 established that the state needed to determine if direct potable reuse was feasible. It also wanted the development of the surface water augmentation regulations, so going into a reservoir, and required that the state finalize the groundwater recharge regulations. You can see that the groundwater recharge regulations shown here in 2014 in the yellow bubble, they were finalized. Prior to this, how did Orange County permit their project? It was through draft regulations that were never finalized. They would just update them as they engaged and met about a project, and they would change what those regulations look like. So this was a big moment for the industry because we now got permanent guidance that people could follow for their indirect potable reuse projects to replenish groundwater basins. We had an expert panel that met, and in 2016, they identified 6 research projects. They also then confirmed that it does look feasible to develop uniform guidelines for direct potable reuse in California. Then in 2017, there's an assembly bill called 574. It was clear that even though it was feasible to develop DPR regulations, our regulators were not going to do it unless there was a movement at the state level to make them do it. So the industry got together and passed another state bill here in California, so our law, and required them to develop these regulations. The surface water regulations shown there in 2018 were adopted, and so that's really allowed San Diego as well as 2 other projects to proceed, Las Virgenes up near Los Angeles, and another program here in San Diego County called the East County project. For DPR, you can see across the top, there's been a lot of versions. So they began by saying, hey, here's our framework. We're going to use these guiding principles. We're going to use this approach. They had a revised framework. After they gave us the outline, so to speak, or the guiding principles with the framework, they began to say, look, here's our language. So we've seen now 3 versions of that language. And there's a final regulation due the end of this year. As I was saying, that language is now really available. It will not change anymore. So a lot of work has been going on to get us here. And one of the big things that we began to get into, and I'll be focusing on today, is actually around the pathogen risk. There's also other aspects, which is chemical, but today's talk, I'm going to really just be focused on the pathogen risk to explain some of the details of what's been going on in California and how we've been approaching it. So we know we're taking a wastewater, which is contaminated with pathogens, and we want to make drinking water. So the main question we began to ask ourselves is it safe? And so we need to make sure that it is. And the way we did that began with our drinking water requirements. We know what those are. That's established by the US EPA and our Safe Drinking Water Act. We want no more than 1 in 10,000 people per year to have a risk of infection. So we then look at the concentration of the pathogens and determine what's needed both for the drinking water, but also what's in the influent. So for wastewater, we know that there's pathogens, and the ones that, after a review of the various pathogens that are present in California, we've focused on virus, Giardia, and crypto. Internationally, you'll also see bacteria be addressed. And in our experience, the bacteria is usually well addressed if you're addressing these three pathogens. So the main question we were asking ourselves is how much treatment is required. And so in California, for indirect potable reuse, we have these requirements. So a 12 log of virus removal, 10 log of Giardia, and 10 log of Cryptosporidium. So 1 log would be 90% removal, 2 logs would be 99% removal, 3 log would be 99.9% removal, and so on. So you can see the number of logs here that we're removing or effectively inactivating these pathogens for is very significant. I also want to point out that we have 3 treatment barriers with at least 1 log for each pathogen. That's a requirement of these regulations, and they restrict us. You can't have more than 6 logs of credit for any single barrier, and they do allow the groundwater basin to serve as one of these barriers. So now I'm going to share a little bit about where did the 12-10-10 come from. 12-10-10 is actually more and more so, I would say, becoming, at least within the United States, sort of a national standard. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the virus. It comes from both of these things, the wastewater concentration, but also the drinking water. And so when you do your QMRA, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but you need a dose response. So how much of the pathogen needs to be drunk before the individual feels the effect or has an infection that occurs. So in California, we relied upon a paper by Regley et al., which is 1991. And this gives us a concentration of virus of 2 roughly times 10 to the minus 7th, most probable number per liter that is considered safe or tolerable for our drinking water. In California, the influent was enterovirus. So this is based on the enteric virus concentrations in wastewater. And it was 10 to the 5th, most probable number per liter, which was the maximum concentration that DDW had found in the literature and was observed in raw wastewater. So you take the log of 10 over 5 divided by 10 to the minus 7, and you're able to get to your 12 logs of inactivation and the requirements for the virus removal. We follow a similar procedure for the Giardia. Here we have a different paper that's providing, actually it's the same paper, Regley again, 1991, that's providing the dose response function for Giardia. It comes up with a different concentration because it's pathogen specific. So it's 6.8 times 10 to the minus 6 cis per liter. And so again, the maximum concentration observed in raw wastewater, 10 to the 5th, and we take 10 to the 5th divided by 10 to the minus 6, and you end up with 10 log removal of Giardia. And finally, we can do the same thing for crypto. For crypto, initially an exponential dose response function by Messenger 2001 was used to determine the safe level of 3 times 10 to the minus 5th. It was estimated that the maximum concentration in wastewater was 10 to the 5th, and so this gave us an LRV of 10. However, as the California regulators continued, these numbers ended up being slightly different. And so as our regulations for groundwater developed, the 2011 version had the values on the left, and the 2014 final regulations have the values on the right. As they looked at the literature, they were unable to find concentrations as high as 10 to the 5th. They actually found the concentration was 10 to the 4th maximum value in the literature. They also happen to have updated their assumption for the dose response. And they shifted away from the Messenger 2001 and updated their assumptions to be more in alignment with the EPA LT2 enhanced surface water treatment rule. And so this changed the assumption for what was safe. And so you can see that the effluent concentration reduced to 1.7 times 10 to the minus 6, and it allowed them to keep the same 10 log as an outcome in these regulations, instead of moving it to 10 to the 9th. So here's a summary of those assumptions. We've got virus with the reference pathogen being enteric virus. Dose response, which was the Regley paper, it's a beta Poisson for rotavirus was used. We have a concentration for drinking water that's 2 times 10 to the minus 7th, and a maximum concentration in wastewater at 10 to the 5th, giving us 12 log removal of virus. For Giardia, also the Regley paper from 1991, it's an exponential dose response curve. The tolerable drinking water density is 6.8 times 10 to the minus 6 cis per liter. And the maximum concentration of wastewater is 10 to the 5th, which gives us a 10 log reduction. For cryptosporidium, really the two approaches that were taken in the draft regulation shown across the top, which is exponential by Mesner et al. 2001, has a drinking water density of 3 times 10 to the minus 5th 00 cis per liter, relies on a maximum wastewater concentration of 10 to the 5th. That's really not been observed in practice. The maximum concentration has been 10 to the 4th that's been documented. But when you adjust and you use US EPA's exponential dose response, you end up with a reduced tolerable density, and you maintained the 10 logs of inactivation as a requirement. I'm now transitioning from indirect potable reuse to direct potable reuse here in California. So this is a regulation that's been developed for projects that will not have an environmental buffer, that will not have the ability to respond to treatment issues or upsets. And so a lot of that thinking or that additional caution has been considered with these regulations compared to indirect potable reuse, where we have a very large environmental buffer, such as a groundwater or a large surface water reservoir, to give us time, dilution, and attenuation. So looking at the log removals here, these are our base public health protection log removal requirements, and they've changed. They've changed from 12-10-10, and that's confusing to many. And so I will be going through why, how could this have happened, and what are these requirements, where are they coming from? So if you recall, for indirect potable reuse, we had 3 treatment processes required, each providing at least 1 log for each pathogen. Now we need 4. So they're replacing the environmental buffer and adding an additional redundant treatment process for pathogens. But you have to have at least 1 log for each of these treatment units for the pathogen attenuation. They're also beginning to enhance or establish requirements around robustness. So the diversity of mechanisms is required. Many facilities now have UV disinfection and physical separation, because that's the membrane treatment and the UV disinfection on the tail end. But they've also added chemical disinfection, and they want to see at least one log of chemical inactivation of these three pathogens, which is a significant change from our indirect potable reuse regulations. So let's get into the log removal requirements here. So the first thing is on virus. The 16 log virus largely comes from a shift from enteric virus to norovirus. So instead of using enteric virus as our basis, which is also the basis of our drinking water regulations in the United States, we're now moving to norovirus. And I think the philosophy here was just to prevent outbreaks or illness of any kind. So the gene copy of 10 to the 9th norovirus was used for these regulations, which is the highest concentration ever observed in raw wastewater. For the drinking water, we have a dose response that results in 3 times 10 to the minus 7th virus per liter. It's a hypergeometric model for norovirus that was from the paper that's cited there in the lower corner, but I can't quite read it. So this is why the change from 12 and increasing our virus removal to 16. The Giardia is really unchanged. It's the same concentrations, the same model, and we end up with another 10 log of Giardia, which is consistent with our indirect potable reuse requirements. The crypto increased by 1 log, and this represents a challenge for many of those developing these potable reuse projects. So let's talk about where this came from. So we still have the 10 to the 4th as the maximum concentration, which you recall was consistent with our indirect potable reuse projects. But even more conservative, the health department used a Beta-Poisson model by Messenger and Berger from a newer paper in 2016. And this changed the tolerable level in drinking water by about a log. And so the reduction went from 10 to 11. And again, they're continuing to use that maximum concentration ever observed. So not a distribution, it's just the highest data point they could find. So summarizing, this is where we end up here in California. We have, for direct potable reuse, virus, Giardia, and crypto remain as our pathogen references. We move virus from enteric virus to norovirus. We kept the 2 protozoa. As a result of the virus shift, the influent concentration also moved to gene copy, since we really don't have good methods to grow and culture norovirus. We're using gene copies, and it's 10 to the 9th. So that's also a translation there, that a gene copy equals an infective virus, which is not always 1-to-1. But they're using gene copies of 10 to the 9th, and that gives us 16 logs of inactivation that must be performed. The Giardia was unchanged at 10 log. For Cryptosporidium, they went to the most recent paper they could find that had an even more conservative dose response function. And so the tolerable drinking water density was reduced, and this increased the resulting log reduction to 11. So I mentioned this kind of earlier here, we're transitioning from indirect potable reuse to direct potable reuse. And so in California, the regulations require redundant treatment. So for a treatment train to reliably provide microbiologically safe drinking water, the treatment train must be designed to include extra log reduction capacity beyond the required log reductions. And the California regulators want to ensure that if an undetected failure occurs, the water produced is still protective of public health. And this is also consistent with the removal of that environmental buffer, which in all of our IPR projects plays a role where things could go wrong without us knowing or have, and we didn't know, and that environmental buffer has helped to ensure that the public has always been drinking safe drinking water. So related to this theme, they're asking for more. Why is redundancy important? So these are already very big numbers, 16, 10, and 11. And the philosophy here is that if there's no redundancy, there's no safety net, and you're walking a tightrope. So with 4 logs of redundancy, that's the requirement after doing their own independent assessment of failures of different advanced treatment plants and what made sense to them. They landed on a 4-log redundancy. So this increases our log removals for direct potable reuse from 16, 10, and 11 to 20, 14, 15. And this is to ensure that we are not at the minimum of public health protection prior to distribution, but there would always be this extra level of safety in the water produced here in California. So this is really the basis. If you've seen, so there's a lot of numbers out there. So 12, 10, 10 for the indirect potable reuse, 16, 10, 11 are really the public health criteria, but the requirement for building a project is 20, 14, 15. So from here, I'm going to transition a little bit to share with you some tools that you could use to assess and maybe look at these same questions for yourselves or your country or your region or your utility to help you progress or advance any potable reuse scheme you might have. So coming out of the feasibility study, a feasibility report by California's state expert panel in 2016, they determined that it was possible to develop uniform guidelines for direct potable reuse. At the same time, they said, hey, there's some big research topics that are still needed to be addressed. 3 of the topics were on pathogens, and there's actually 6 topics in total. So 3 of them were also on chemicals. 1 of them is shown there as 6 because it's a source control panel that was led by the California State Water Board. So not a research project, but more a panel meeting to discuss requirements for source control programs. That report's also available. And I'm not going to be covering the chemicals. I'm just going to continue to focus on the pathogens. I'm going to talk about a tool for evaluating the quantitative microbial risk and plant performance reliability, and also talk about measuring pathogens in wastewater. So these projects are known affectionately in California as DPR1 and DPR2. DPR1 really looked at the pathogen treatment and risk, how much treatment is needed, and can we meet our risk goals to provide safe drinking water. And DPR2 was, we don't actually have a lot of data on pathogens in raw wastewater. How would we develop more information to be sure that our approach is going to be robust and provide that public health protection that we're all looking for? So the good news is this stuff is available. The DPR risk, we actually have a QMRA tool known as DPR risk. It's a quantitative microbial risk assessment and probabilistic assessment of treatment train performance for direct potable reuse scenarios. You're not just given the tool on its own, but there's guidance on how to follow the steps and what you should be doing to be able to allow you to use the tool properly, and helps you understand the whole approach to doing the QMRA yourself. So the tool itself was written in R using the R Shiny web-based platform by Dr. Zito at the University of Washington. Again, it actually will perform the quantitative microbial risk assessment, and it also has the ability to put in functions for probabilistic assessment of your treatment train performance. So log removals aren't just a number. They come in and get reported by your online analyzers or the information you're using from the data generated about the unit process to define those log removals. And so they have curves. And so you can then add up the different unit processes you have and get a distribution of that performance. And that's known as the probabilistic assessment of the treatment train performance. This tool is available, I think, at 2 locations. One, I'm showing the link there for the California State Water Board, and also the Water Research Foundation website. Both of those are links where you can go get this tool. So it's a pretty nice and easy to use tool. You choose your pathogen that you want to focus on. You choose whether it's a enumeration method, it's culture or PCR. You choose how the pathogen concentrations were provided, log normal distribution, what's your mean, what's the standard deviation. So there's a lot of options using the scientific approaches that are more standard for describing the distribution of your influent pathogen concentration. You then can adjust the exposure. You can use different amounts of assumptions of water consumption that would occur. How is the consumer drinking the water? And even put in a distribution of drinking the water, or just use a point estimate of, hey, they had 1 liter a day or 2 liters a day. And all these little assumptions matter in what you end up finding as a result. You can also choose your dose response. So there's a default, just as there's a default for the exposure. But you can input a different dose response if you were interested in using a different paper or a different assumption for your QMRA results. So you're basically the how much pathogens would cause a given result. You can also choose different treatment trains. Here we're talking about the virus, so we're looking for a treatment train for direct potable in California that provides 20 logs. You can see there's a lot of treatment there being provided, but you could do it with RO, without RO. All the different types of technologies are in there. And then you can also input the types of failures. So do you want to do it globally? So just simpler version is just have the failures applied randomly across the whole treatment train. You can adjust or by unit process. You adjust the magnitude. How much of the log removals do you want to assume have a problem? So are you going to lose half of the logs of this unit process, or all of the logs, or 10% of the logs? And then you can also adjust for how long. How long did this failure occur? Is it 15 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it 8 hours? Maybe an operator shift. And then how often would this occur in a year, these type of failures, or within multiple years? So it occurs once every 5 years or something. You're able to put this into the model. And then what you get is an output. And so it takes all this information and it gives you your daily probability of infection. And you can see this on a percentile. And what you get out here to the upper right, all of these end up, these risks end up in these very rare, very improbable scenarios. But those are the type of events that really most of the health practitioners focus on trying to avoid. So that's essentially what you get as an outcome. You're looking to see, hey, did my design, did my approach violate my health goal, and if so, how often, and what were the assumptions behind it. So why is this tool helpful? It really allows different states and countries to develop their own log reduction requirements. California has what we're doing, but it's very conservative. It's understood that it might not be the right approach for everyone. And so for your region, your utility, you can discuss these topics, and then get and use the inputs that are agreed upon within the scientific community performing the work for you. And I think that's very important. The DPR risk also allows you to perform the QMRA with your own wastewater data. So you could sample your own facility and have a pathogen sampling program and determine your own risk assessment. And so with that, I'm going to transition to the other project, which is how to get high quality pathogen data in the treated wastewater. So this project is known as DPR2. It's a quality assurance project plan that really helps to set the bar for generating good pathogen data in the wastewater environment. There's a couple significant studies, one in Australia, one that was done in the United States looking at pathogens prior to this, but they just had a handful of data compared to the amount of data that this work for our direct potable reuse development generated. So in this document, there are SOPs, so standard protocols on how to optimize and minimize non-detects. So it's prior to this work, it was pretty common to sample wastewater and say, oh, I don't have crypto. The reality is you just weren't doing that correctly. So the crypto and the Giardia is always there. It's that the methods and the approach being used were not correct. So this eliminates that. We ended up with a 94% detection rate for all the culture and microscopy assays. So moving it up to a very high level of detections. There's extensive QA/QC requirements, and so matrix spikes, and that helps provide the ability to correct for the recovery. So you know that you're going to get some of the pathogens measured and quantified, but you're not going to get all of them. And so this QA/QC allows you to then adjust and say, okay, if my recovery is 40%, that means I need to adjust back to make sure I'm capturing those other 60% that my data do not show me. And we looked at this from wastewater from 5 different facilities, and we did this across 3 different laboratories. So there were 3 different laboratory partners involved. So this is the extensive data set that was generated from what we call the DPR2 project. It went on for 14 months. It was done in San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, Orange County, and there's 2 very large plants in Los Angeles. So there's also the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts, which they just renamed their large plant as the Warren facility. And the other plant is Hyperion with the LA Sanitation. They're next to the LAX airport, for any of you that have visited Los Angeles. So these are all the major agencies and major wastewater plants in California. So we took these 5 facilities and we generated 24 samples from these 5 facilities for each of the pathogens. So we have a total of 120 samples of pathogens. We also did indicators. So we've got a lot for virus: enterovirus cultured, enterovirus PCR, adenovirus cultured, adenovirus PCR, norovirus PCR, and as we were doing this project, along came COVID. So the project was modified and we added COVID as one of the viruses that we were looking for. And of course we have Giardia and crypto. So this is an extensive data set. Again, if you don't have the resources to generate your own data, this may be a good data set to use and rely on. If you wanted to generate your own, you have these SOPs and could proceed to generate your own data. So as I was mentioning, these results are available and they're there for you to use. I'm showing here the paper and the report where you can get this information from. I'm pleased to say it's open access, so you don't have to pay for it. You can just look this up and go get the paper and use this as you will, which is great. So I'm getting here to the conclusions. California has a long history successfully implementing potable reuse through groundwater recharge. Projects are under construction that make use of the new indirect potable reuse regulations for reservoir and will be online in 2025. Jason's talking next, and there are many successful groundwater recharge projects that have been operating for a long time, but we're beginning now to take the water above ground and put them in reservoirs. I think this is really exciting because I believe the public's going to see the clarity and the high quality of this water, and it should begin to get even more public confidence building and more excitement around potable reuse. We've got different log reduction requirements for direct potable and IPR. This is confusing. It's confusing for members within the United States. And it really comes down to the reference pathogens, the dose response functions that were used, and also how much redundancy is put in the regulation when we look towards direct potable reuse. And then lastly, just sharing with you some of the tools that we used, and hoping that's helpful to you as your country or your utility looks to develop potable reuse regulations for your own benefit. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Shane, for your comprehensive, detailed, and informative presentation. I believe a good number of members of the audience will have inspiration to conduct some of the work you were just offering them. So most likely there will be theses, reports, and certainly experimental work to work with this DPR1 and DPR2, and particularly implementing water reuse, probably as you have done in California, starting with indirect potable reuse, maybe subsequently indirect potable reuse. So before we have limited time, maybe about 10 minutes, I would like to open the floor in case our audience has some questions. I do have a question, but I would like to pose the question at the end. Miguel Ángel.
Sí, Rafael, de momento no tenemos ninguna pregunta, con lo cual, si quieres, adelántate tú y vamos esperando, por si llega alguna.
Okay. Again, it's amazing. All the work and the research and the interpretation and evaluation you have conducted. You personally and all the colleagues and researchers in the US and particularly in California. One question that most likely some of our audience have been considering is, how do you assign a logarithmic removal value to a given process? Imagine you have reverse osmosis. You say, I will assign to that one 2 logs or 3 logs. Is there a standardized way to do it?
That's an excellent question. So in California, for each unit process, we have an online monitor of a surrogate that must be tracked in order to get and demonstrate that log removal is functioning. So for the reverse osmosis process, as an example, the common log removal surrogates that were used were conductivity in the past. That shows you typically 1 log, a little more than 1 log. We know that reverse osmosis provides more than that. So we've moved to TOC. So we monitor the influent TOC to the RO and then the effluent TOC with real-time monitoring, so online monitoring. And that allows us to calculate the log removal that we see for the RO, and that moves us up to 2 most of the time. This work continues because we know RO is doing more than 2 logs. And so there are new indicators and online instruments that are being evaluated. One of them is strontium. So strontium is just a natural occurring metal in water. And so strontium is measured into the RO and out of the RO. And this can show us 3 logs of removal. Orange County's also, and others are also considering sulfate as another indicator. So just like strontium, it's just a dissolved mineral or salt in the water. And we're able to look at it with online analyzers. And this begins to show us more logs than we currently get credit for. So in addition to just monitoring the surrogate, it's more than that. There was research done to show that when these surrogates are tracked and viruses are challenged, so viruses are put into the water of the RO, that surrogate is conservative. So the virus removal was always more than the surrogate removal that we're demonstrating. And we had to do compromises, and we connect that performance together to show that it is indeed the pathogens that we're able to assure we're getting that log removal or better. Most of the time, the real log removal is better than what we can document.
But that is assuming that you are operating the facility during the demonstration period, because if you want to plan the construction of something, you have to assume a value, and then before you put it into operation, you have to confirm that value. Is that the standard protocol?
Yeah, and it's actually interesting you're bringing this up. So in California, Jason, as well as myself, were involved in a project. Then I would say I'm hoping it's the next big initiative here, which would be we call it CalVal, California's validation. We're trying to develop validation documents per technology. So this way, you know how many logs you're going to get for this unit process. You know how you have to monitor it and how you will have to operate it. Because right now it's very, sometimes US EPA guidance, sometimes NWRI guidance, so some other documents here in California. Sometimes it's just the regulators telling you what they think right now. So unfortunately, it's not always the same answer, and we're working towards making that more consistent.
Okay, I may have another simple question, but I would like to ask Jose Miguel, do we have any question from the floor?
Sí, Rafael, mira, tenemos una pregunta de Nicolás que le pregunta al doctor Shane que cuál sería su consejo para la transición y para el cierre de un ciclo de tratamiento terciario de una planta de aguas residuales a una estación de tratamiento de agua potable convencional. ¿Cuál sería ese proceso y esa transición?
It's a complex excuse me, question. The question is how you transition from a regular, non-potable reclamation facility into a facility that can produce potable water. In other words, going from irrigation water, non-potable water, all the way to direct potable reuse. How would you transition? I understand in time. And I already have an answer for that, but probably they're asking you.
Yeah, and this is what's happening here. This is at large scales. This is what folks are planning. A lot of it, and it isn't talked about in our regulations, comes back, I think, to doing the wastewater treatment correctly in the first place. So managing your residual streams, making sure you have the type of sewage and industrial inputs controlled so that you can get a good quality treated secondary effluent that you can then filter, disinfect, and then transition to begin to advance treat it. So then adding the membrane treatment and disinfection and chemical removal on top of it. So that would be what I would say. I would emphasize the focus on doing the core treatment well, getting it filtered, disinfected, and then beginning to advance treat that wastewater as you progress into the future.
Just to add a brief comment to your answer, I would put the time frame of what is happening in California. 2008,
yeah.
GWRS 2023, the beginning of direct potable reuse. So that would be the transition in time for anyone.
Very long time.
To go from one to the other. You really have to do your job very well for many years before you can consider or be allowed to go into the next step.
Yeah, at least 10 years. Yeah.
Jose Miguel, I think we are beyond our time, 5 minutes over time, but that's okay because I will shut up and don't say anything, give the floor to Jason immediately after. If there is any further question, otherwise we will close the session.
Una muy rápida, Rafael, que nos hacía Luis. Luis preguntaba si el Cristosporidium es destruido, si este elemento es destruido en el tratamiento de membrana o quizás pueda activarse en un futuro.
So the question seems to be, is the Cryptosporidium being inactivated during the membrane system? Or what is your assessment of the ways of the inactivation process affecting Cryptosporidium?
Yeah. So Cryptosporidium compared to the membranes, both of them, membrane filtration, so that's microfiltration or ultrafiltration, and then even smaller, tighter is reverse osmosis. The Cryptosporidium is very large. So we just have to make sure that the fibers are intact, and we have requirements to make sure the fibers are not broken, so there's no compromises where the crypto could go through. Because if the membranes are there, the barrier's there, and you're filtering the water, the crypto are not able to pass. So you physically just are removing them out of the water. So they're no longer there. They get sent back to the wastewater plant. They go to the solids handling because the membranes physically strain them out and remove them. And we have two processes that easily remove crypto.
Rafael, ya para finalizar de forma muy breve también, La pregunta de siempre, ¿cuál es la aceptación de la población para consumir agua potable producida directamente a partir de las aguas residuales tratadas? ¿Qué aceptación tiene la población? Con eso cerramos.
The final question is, what is the current public acceptance of direct potable reuse?
Our political acceptance of it is very strong. So the governor of California is actually for the first time interested in these regulations. They're helping him meet his objectives, and it's a priority. So he wants more direct potable reuse. Similarly, we have mayors, both for Los Angeles, who's come out and said they're going to reuse all of the water. Direct potable reuse is part of that scheme. Same with San Diego. So you're seeing wide political support. Why am I beginning with the politics? Because that they allow the projects to continue and succeed as long as there's political support. There's always some portion of the public that is concerned, and there's nothing we can do to convince them of how safe the water is. But I would also say a lot of work. It began with Orange County, who's going to talk next, but San Diego learned from it, and public outreach has been a focus. So going into the community, talking to the various political leaders and neighborhood leaders to make sure they understand what the project is and make sure they understand that it's safe. This work is never ending. It's continuous. And in San Diego, actually, they shifted it from only 25% in favor and 75% opposed to 75% in favor and 25% opposed, just with a demonstration project and really engaging the public.
And if I may add, because of necessity, after these 5 years plus 3 years drought, you end up putting a little bit more attention on these new initiatives.
Yes.
So it's time to stop our presentation now. Thank you again. It was probably the most comprehensive presentation we have been able to offer to our audience. Thank you so much for being with us, for taking the time and the effort to present that. And we'll be more than happy to call you again sometime in the near future to see if we can do better than we are doing now. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
We wish you a lot of success in your initiatives.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you, Shane. Bye.
Okay, now it's time. We are still within our limits to give the floor to Jason Dalakis, our colleague at Orange County Water District. I made a presentation before. I think he was with us at the time, although he was having difficulties with the communication. Without any further delay, I like to leave the floor so you can make your presentation in a very relaxed way. Jason, please, you are welcome. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Rafael. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction earlier. And I really appreciate the invitation to speak with this group today. I think Shane gave a very good, excellent overview of our regulations here in California, and certainly with emphasis on pathogen control for potable reuse. And so it's my hope that I can talk a little bit specifically about our experience here in Orange County and how we have navigated some of these same regulations here throughout our history and how we're doing that currently in a very applied sense. So again, thank you again for today's opportunity. So I do want to give just a brief overview of Orange County Water Districts for folks to know where I'm from, where I work, what we're doing. We are a district in Southern California, located between Los Angeles and San Diego along the Pacific Ocean. And it's the fundamental job of the district is to manage a large groundwater basin here in coastal Southern California, about 900 square kilometers. of area. And it's a very important resource to protect because through our efforts, we're able to have 85% of the local potable water supply come from groundwater. And that's somewhat unique in Southern California. Most other areas, especially places down in San Diego, parts of Los Angeles up to Ventura, are much more reliant on imported water. And so the local reliability of groundwater can't be overstated. Our annual extractions from the basin are about 370,000 megaliters, and we have 2.5 million residents in our service area. So as I mentioned, much of Southern California is quite dependent on imported surface water. In the 20th century, early 20th century, a number of aqueduct systems were developed, starting with the Los Angeles aqueduct that goes up to the Owens Valley. It was developed by William Mulholland to supply the city of Los Angeles, followed by the Colorado River aqueduct that brings water from our east to coastal Southern California. And then in the mid-century, the State Water Project was developed with the California Aqueduct. Again, as Shane mentioned, we're in a semi-arid area, somewhat a Mediterranean-like climate, and it was discovered early on that the local water resources were insufficient, largely. And so the area invested heavily in infrastructure for transporting water long distances to Southern California. Of course, in the modern area, this has been challenged through climate change, extended drought, and the realization that these large water transfers do have environmental impacts. So here in Orange County, we're blessed to have a large groundwater basin. This is a cross section of the basin here, from the Pacific Ocean inland to the Anaheim area where Disneyland is. It's an alluvial system, about 3,000 feet deep at its center, at its deepest point. But most of the water supply wells and extractions occur in that middle principal aquifer you'll see in the center, with the typical well these days being anywhere from 500 to 1,000 feet deep. And in this area, there are about 200 large system water supply wells that are managed by about 20 retail agencies that own and operate those wells. And those are Orange County Water District's primary stakeholders, our primary customers. We manage the basin largely on their behalf and that of their ratepayers. And so one of the things we do as the groundwater manager is we have a managed aquifer recharge program. We try to store extra water underground. You can see these various sources, how they've changed over the years. And you can see most recently on the right side of the graph, those pink bars, that's really been our introduction of planned recycled water into the system. And so you can see how important that has become for us. Essentially, in the long-term average, we try to match the amount of recharge to the amount of pumping to keep that sustainable in our basin. And as you can see, recycled water has become a real key for us to do that. This shows it sort of just on an annual average basis, this pie chart. Again, the various supplies we have to store underground on an annual basis and capture. This shows an average year. We like to joke in California, we never have an average year. We usually have one of the extremes, usually a period being somewhat dry, or several years of dry weather, and then followed by a large wet year. But on balance, this is roughly the distribution we see on an average annual basis in terms of local surface water, stormwater capture, imported water. We'll still sometimes purchase imported water when it's available for recharge. But you can see, that recycled water component has become quite important to us, and it's the one we have the most control over, and is actually, because of our treatment, which I'm going to talk about, it's actually the highest quality supply we have as well. Another key reason we've invested in recycled water here is not only from a water quantity or sustainability standpoint, also to help us manage our water quality. Being a coastal groundwater basin, we are susceptible to seawater intrusion. So injecting some of our recycled water into the coast in the seawater intrusion barrier helps protect our groundwater basin from seawater intrusion. And we've been doing that since the 1970s. So this effort in potable reuse in Orange County, as Shane mentioned, really began in the 1970s with Water Factory 21, really a first of its kind facility that took treated sewage effluent, which would normally discharge the Pacific Ocean, and treated to a level such that it was safe to inject into a potable aquifer, again, to protect it from seawater intrusion. You can see the unit processes here. Started with lime clarification, ammonia stripping, recarbonation, multimedia filtration, and then the water was split into two parallel paths. One went to granular activated carbon for organics removal. The other half went to reverse osmosis for demineralization. The GAC treated water also received chlorination as its primary disinfectant. And then that water was blended and injected into our seawater barrier. And so this facility operated for over 25 years, really pioneering work here in Orange County in the 1960s and 1970s to develop this project. But yeah, as I mentioned, chlorination was really the primary disinfection as we start to talk about pathogens today. We just had a single chlorine contact basin with 30-minute contact time. And at that time, our early permits, the only real monitoring requirement was to look for E. coli on a daily basis out of this facility as the primary monitoring technique. However, there was an interest from the state and others in terms of understanding pathogen removal better. So a number of studies on virus removal were conducted early in Water Factory 21. The image on the left shows a study that was funded by U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and conducted by Stanford University in cooperation with Orange County Water District. The graphic on the right just shows investigating the lime clarification process, seeing what that could do for virus removal in the late 1970s. And it was discovered that the high pH of lime clarification was actually a pretty good barrier for many viruses based on the culture methods that were available at the time. Additional testing showed that the reverse osmosis product and then the final combined effluent facilities also consistently non-detect for culturable viruses at that time. So moving on to the groundwater replenishment system that Shane mentioned, this is our larger project, the successor to Water Factory 21. We used the product water from this larger facility for an enlarged seawater intrusion barrier. We expanded it from its original footprint in the 1970s to give us better control over seawater intrusion in our basin. But then we also were making enough water that we could use this for direct replenishment of the basin outside of areas subject to seawater intrusion through injection wells. But on the primary way we recharge the basin with this water is just through surface spreading. We're blessed that we have some very favorable geology in the inland portion of the basin where surface spreading is very effective. And so the project is the largest potable reuse project in the world. You can see it came online in 3 phases, starting in 2008 at 265,000 cubic meters per day. We've expanded it twice, and just this year finished our final expansion, bringing us to a capacity of nearly 500,000 cubic meters per day of capacity. So the treatment processes, and these have been alluded to today a little bit by Shane earlier. These uses what's called full advanced treatment here in California. This is the requirement for direct injection into an aquifer in California. We take secondary effluent again from the Orange County Sanitation District, run it through low pressure membrane filtration, either microfiltration or ultrafiltration, followed by 100% of the flow going through reverse osmosis, brackish water RO system, and then finally going through ultraviolet light and hydrogen peroxide for dedicated disinfection, direct photolysis of photosensitive compounds, and then advanced oxidation, primarily aiming it and as an extra barrier to low molecular weight organics that can potentially get through the RO system. And then that water goes to either primarily to our recharge basins, but also to our injection wells, either the seawater intrusion barrier or in the central portion of our basin for direct replenishment. This map just shows some of those locations here. You can see our facility in the lower portion of the map, and then also our seawater intrusion barrier, the Talbert barrier there. If you follow the red line up to the north, up the page, you'll see our MBI project. That's mid-basin injection. That's where we're directly injecting this high quality water into the central portion of our basin where there's a lot of pumping, a lot of well extractions. And then the pipeline continues up into the Anaheim area where you see 4 of our recharge basins called out that take the majority of the flow from our facility. This is just a picture of the water coming to one of our recharge basins. As Shane mentioned earlier, as you start introducing this water into reservoirs and basins, it's very impressive, right? The clarity of this highly treated water has a really nice visual effect. And again, I mentioned the favorable geology we have in this area. We're able, given the high quality of this water and all the solids removal that's occurred in it, and through the demineralization process, in certain facilities, we're able to achieve infiltration rates of 3 to 5 meters per day of this water. So very, very rapid infiltration allows us to rapidly replenish this portion of our aquifer and even get this water to subsequent depth, this very profound depths of 200 and 300 meters very quickly in this area. So I want to start talking a little bit about pathogens, kind of building off Shane's remarks earlier. Just a little bit of history here. When we developed the project, we developed the groundwater replenishment system, we were operating under some of those draft state of California regulations that Shane mentioned in the late 90s. So there were a couple design targets we had to go for. The first was, turbidity, and that removal being primarily provided by the membrane processes, especially the microfiltration as shown here. And then just some basic, requirements for monitoring and removal of total coliform bacteria. Those are the key to the recycled water regulations in California even today. And, having our dedicated disinfection through our UV system was how we would ensure that we would comply with these after the membrane processes. And the original design criteria for the advanced water treatment plant here at GWS was a 2-log removal of pathogens through the reverse osmosis process, and then a 4-log removal or inactivation through the ultraviolet disinfection process. We eventually obtained a permit in 2004 for the groundwater replenishment system, had more specificity to it. It acknowledged that, in California, under the NWRI guidelines, that membrane filtration plus ultraviolet light were deemed to be able to provide at least 5-log inactivation of virus. Those guidelines have some, recommendations on dose that's required, and turbidity as shown here, and also specify the UV transmittance of the RO permeate such that the disinfection can be achieved. Kind of related to what one of Raphael's questions is, to verify this, we had to do some challenge testing at our facility to verify the exact dose that we required to receive that 4-log credit for pathogens for virus through a challenge using MS2. And again, this permit also specified those total coliform limits that we would have to abide by through daily monitoring and testing of our finished product water that are shown here through a 7-day median, a 30-day maximum, and then a single sample maximum, consistent with California's recycled water regulations. Another interesting nuance, and this Shane mentioned that the role of the groundwater basin in pathogen control. These early regulations in California required a certain amount of retention time underground to ensure an additional barrier of time and virus die-off in the subsurface. And if you're going to do direct injection, like we would our seawater intrusion barrier, the water was required to be underground for at least 12 months before extraction and travel at least 600 meters in the subsurface as that additional barrier. For surface spreading, where there's probably a little bit more soil aquifer treatment occurring during the vertical migration, those limits were at least 6 months of travel time and 150 meters of travel distance before the water could be extracted for potable use. Kind of skipping forward now to the more current requirements, and this is essentially the same slide Shane showed about the requirements we have to follow for groundwater recharge here in California, right? The 12-10-10 removal for virus, Giardia and Cryptosporidium, the requirement for three independent barriers, achieving at least 1 log, the cap on any single process being credited 6 log, and also highlighting again that subsurface, we can receive credit for time underground in addition to the above ground treatment, if we go through certain steps to document that. So this slide kind of summarizes kind of our credits today at the groundwater replenishment system. Again, starting on the left, you can see the 12, 10, 10 is our requirements. We've begun an effort to actually receive some credit from the upstream wastewater process, the primary and secondary treatment provided to us by our partners of the Orange County Sanitation District. We also receive typically at least 4 log credit for the protozoa through microfiltration and ultrafiltration. I'll talk a little bit more of that in a moment. And then the reverse osmosis, we actually have a range, a tiered approach that gets at some of the new developments that Shane was alluding to in terms of ways to demonstrate more credit. UV advanced oxidation process, that's really driven by the AOP. Those energy requirements allow us to achieve the full 6 log credit there for those. And then our underground retention time, we receive that credit for virus, and we're able to achieve 4 logs of credit there through 4 months of retention. And I'll talk about each of these individually just briefly. So in terms of the wastewater side, this is a new effort that our agency and others have been pursuing. Is we know there's likely some removal of virus through just traditional primary and secondary treatment. So we engage in a study looking at those processes at our partner, OC San. It's a little bit complicated there at their site because they actually operate 4 separate secondary treatment facilities that supply water to our groundwater replenishment system. So we had to characterize the influent and effluent concentrations in all 4 of those facilities. We did that over the course of about a year, a little more than a year, assembling that occurrence data set and trying to assess removal. And then the big challenge has been after collecting the data is deciding what kind of statistical technique are we going to use to assess that data and really understand removal through a wastewater treatment facility. And one approach we've taken is using a covariance approach. After seeing that the influent and effluent data sets are pretty correlated, we received some outside guidance that this could be an approach that the state of California might accept. But the state of California will always hold us to, at least right now, is of those 4 processes at Orange County Sanitation District for secondary treatment, we're kind of held or bound by what the worst performing one is, right? The lowest one. And for that, that's a trickling filter facility that supplies about 20% of our influent. So we've gone through this analysis using the covariance method and attempted to derive kind of the 5th percentile removal of cultivable virus at that trickling filter process. And this process has led us to a proposal of a 0.7 log removal of virus. And so we've submitted this analysis to the state of California. We're still waiting to hear if they will grant us credits based on this approach. The low pressure membranes, microfiltration, ultrafiltration, I think we're all aware those are good barriers for crypto and Giardia, as Shane mentioned earlier. We run 2 different sizes here. We run traditional polypropylene microfiltration membrane, 0.2 micron pore size. And then we move forward with our expansion to using a PVDF membrane, tighter ultrafiltration membrane with a 0.04 micron pore size. And yes, as Shane mentioned, through size exclusion, we get good removal of Giardia and crypto. But the way we have to verify this, and it gets to some of Raphael's questions about, and for all these processes, every day we have to do a verification of all these processes, right? Whether it's the wastewater process, the low pressure membranes, the reverse osmosis, the UV, the state requires a minimum daily assessment of the integrity of that process to prove to them that you're getting this credit. It's not just a challenge you can do when you commission and then you're good. They want a daily test that has some surrogate that lets them know that your process is working as it's supposed to be. So the primary way we do that for our low pressure membranes is through a daily pressure decay or membrane integrity test. We have to do that in all 48 individual cells we have across the day. Then we take the results of those tests and analyze them using US EPA's membrane filtration guidance manual. There are a series of equations there that relate the operating condition of those cells along with the decay of that pressure hold test. And that translates directly into a log removal value for those protozoa, for Giardia and Cryptosporidium. Unfortunately, that math and those equations do not lead to a virus credit. even though we all know that ultrafiltration is a pretty good virus barrier, right? But the way the decay tests are set up, they can't detect a breach in the membrane that's the size of the virus. For protozoa, they can, but for virus, they cannot. Therefore, the state does not allow us to demonstrate virus credit currently for low pressure membranes because of that limitation. So one thing we do is here, our target is a minimum of 4 log through this process. If we get less than a 4 log result in a cell, we kind of know there's an issue, perhaps have an integrity issue. We take that cell offline and it's inspected and repaired before it's put back into service on a daily basis. And then we also have turbidity requirements as well, like any filtration process as well, to maintain that credit. And this is just an example of some of the reporting we have to do. Every month we compile a report that we send to the state of California that documents those pressure decay tests in every single cell on every single day, that shows that we're meeting those minimum requirements. And so this is something we've had to work with our programmers and our SCADA to be able to reliably put this out and present the condition of essentially the system every single day as part of our compliance monitoring. Reverse osmosis, building off what Shane mentioned here, traditionally, the way to demonstrate your 1 or 2 log credits here have been on using online electroconductivity or TOC analyzers. That's something we do currently. But then we're also involved in studies to look at some of these newer techniques, some sort of modern alternatives where we either have more sensitivity from detection or we just have larger concentrations in the influent of these surrogates that are well removed, such that we can calculate a larger removal across the process. So these are things like sulfate, strontium, even something like free ATP. We've been testing a number of these instruments to see if we can come up with something reliable, something that improves upon the total organic carbon we use today. Some of our studies have shown that if you use things like strontium and sulfate, you can more reliably get a log removal value closer to 3. And so that's really driving the interest, right? Trying to get reverse osmosis more of the credit it deserves. Another thing, and this is some work that Shane and his firm have worked on with another utility, really showing the sensitivity of something like strontium. It can let you know you have a breach in your RO system much more quickly. It's much more sensitive to any variation, any breakthrough, right, through an imperfection in the RO system. They've shown pretty clearly that something like strontium, because there's just so much more of a signal coming into the system, that can be detected much earlier than using something like electrical conductivity or TDS. So that's another reason why the regulators actually are in favor of moving towards this type of approach. So what we have approved now at GWRS is sort of a tiered approach for log removal RO. Kind of shown in the middle in the green is the current kind of tier 2 and tier 3 we use. Again, relying on TOC and electroconductivity. We're allowed to use those on the combined bulk feed to the system. We're a very large system here, right? We have 27 different RO units. And so instrumenting all of them individually is costly and a lot of work to do. But for TOC and electroconductivity, we can use the bulk influent and the bulk effluent from all 27 of those units to show this. But one complication of moving to some of these more advanced methods like sulfate, like strontium, like ATP, that could give us more credit, the state's current position is if you're going to do that, you have to monitor this on each individual unit. So you need to take 27 measurements every day, and you'll likely be held to your worst performing one. So that becomes an instrumentation problem, a maintenance problem, even a plumbing problem if you're going to try to do this in an automated way in a large system. The other alternative is just taking 27 samples a day from the system and be able to analyze them quickly, because again, it gets back to the state requires you to make this assessment once per day. Again, here's just an example of the monthly report we send out using, using our TOC removal during the day, using our electroconductivity removal day, calculating that log removal and reporting that to show compliance. UV is actually probably one of the more straightforward systems for showing pathogen log credit, largely I think because in California there's also an advanced oxidation requirement that most people use a UV-based AOP for this. Our our energy dose is really driven by the need to remove a half a log of 1,4-dioxane through this process. And so from that, we're able to go through and I guess I would say in addition to 1,4-dioxane, many are aware we're also trying to remove the low molecular weight organic NDMA through this process as well that is not as well removed by reverse osmosis. And so those two requirements there, we found there's a relationship between the dose you need to remove adenovirus, and this is sort of a newer requirement from the state of California based on work by EPA. They need you to demonstrate one way or another a 300 millijoule per square centimeter dose, because they believe that that's their interpretation of some EPA work that'll give you 6 logs of adenovirus removal. And so working with our UV system manufacturer to translate, something we can measure more easily, like an NDMA, removal, the dose associated with that, and then trying to work that back to what that means from an adenovirus removal. We basically found that if we're getting about half a log of NDMA removal through the process, we should be getting that 6 log adenovirus removal. And based on our validation testing that we've conducted recently, we know we're getting that type of NDMA removal when we're getting our 1,4-dioxane half log removal. So it's a bit of an extrapolation, a bit of a dose equivalency, but at the end of the day, the high dose UV we're doing for photolysis and for advanced oxidation more than meets the requirement to get our 6 log maximum out of the UV system. And so we can show that relatively easily. And finally, the last process I just want to touch on is that underground retention time credit. For many years, this was kind of a black box to many of us, how the state of California was regulating this, coming up with their standard. The default credit for virus is you get 1 log removal for every month the water spends underground before it's extracted. This is really based on a paper from the mid-1980s by Marilyn Yates, when she was a graduate student at University of Arizona, looking at virus persistence. And it was basically just a temperature-based incubation study looking at various groundwaters around the country. And it assumed, the state took that study and assumed a pretty low temperature for that. As folks are, I'm sure you're all aware, as you get to higher temperatures, virus die-off tends to increase. And so we think we actually may benefit from the higher temperatures you typically find in wastewater, more like 20, 25 degrees centigrade, as opposed to the 12 degrees that was assumed by the state in putting this regulation together. That if you perform a study at these higher temperatures, you might be able to show relatively easily that you might be entitled to more credit at these higher temperatures. And this assumes no removal through filtration, through predation of the subsurface. This is all sort of just temperature-based. So we are working right now to develop a site-specific study that we think maybe it'll take advantage of the relatively higher temperature of our purified recycled water, and perhaps we could gain more than that base 1 log per month credit. So that's something we're continuing to pursue. Just to summarize, this is kind of the cover sheet of that monthly report we send out every month to our regulators here that summarizes the Giardia, Cryptosporidium virus removal across all the major unit processes. And basically we get kind of like a green light, we get a grade every day. It's like a pass-fail every day. You're either good or you're not. And if you're below that 12-10-10 for an extended period of time, there's certain ramifications you have to face. You have to have a certain amount of time to fix it. Otherwise, you have to shut your facility down. So in conclusion, I just want to, kind of building off Shane's talk, the California pathogen requirements have certainly evolved here over time. We started with the draft regulations that first came out in 1978 here to guide our design and operation of Water Factory 21, which really, only required that 1 chlorine contact basin for disinfection. As I mentioned, we did a number of studies back then to sort of verify not only chlorination, but the other processes such as the lime clarification and reverse osmosis were also good pathogen barriers. A lot of seminal work was done then. But then as the state updated its regulations and continued to permit us on a case-by-case basis, those changed, right? UV became more of the technology in favor for disinfection, largely because of its ability to be employed in with advanced oxidation. So initially we had, UV doses of 500 to 1,000 or 100 millijoules per square centimeter to achieve a 4 log requirement that was required initially. And then that expanded under those final regulations that came out in 2014 it's something where we actually need to show a much higher dose if we want to get the full 6 log pathogen credit. So we've had to adapt our operations and our monitoring to accommodate that. And then certainly, as you heard from Shane, due to a different approach and more required redundancy, the direct potable regulations are a whole nother level beyond the 12.10.10 that we have to abide by for groundwater. I'll say that, as I mentioned, that requirement for daily integrity tests on the low pressure membranes makes getting virus credit challenging for us. I know in other countries, such as Australia, they're able to do like an annual test, like a dye test or an annual challenge, and they're able to get 3 logs of virus credit from that, as long as they their turbidity is good and they're meeting their integrity tests. So far, the regulators in California have not been yet satisfied with the approach like that. They want to test every single day that verifies each of your pathogen removals. Again, I think I'm optimistic as Shane is that there are some new and more sensitive monitoring approaches that can increase our O credit, using various ions and other techniques. However, there's still challenges when it comes to implementing that at a large scale facility like ours, right? Just the amount of instrumentation you would need to do that would be significant and costly. So we're just trying to still look at that question and see if there's some efficiencies, see if there's an efficient way to do that, because we would like to get the enhanced credit that we know is occurring. We just need to be able to prove it on a daily basis. And finally, I think it goes without saying, the ultraviolet credit is very important to us here. It constitutes, a sense, the majority of our credit, at least half of it. And so it's so important that a lot of our SCADA and alarming is very attuned to the UV, such that if we have a power loss or an issue with the UV, that is one of the few things that triggers a complete shutdown of our facility, right? Because it's so crucial. And just to mention, we get this question a lot. The groundwater replenishment system is a very successful indirect potable reuse scheme here. And so we don't have any immediate plans to pursue direct potable reuse here in Orange County. Never say never, but we're just set up very well here because we're blessed with our groundwater basin and our geology that doing groundwater IPR really works well for us here. So with that, I'll stop here. I really appreciate your attention and the honor of speaking with you all today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Jason, for your presentation from this practical approach to your reality, to the work you are conducting every day. Let me say, before we open the floor for questioning, the least we can say about this water production facility is that it's really challenging. And really, I would say it's a very risky business, considering the amount of monitoring that you have to conduct, validation through integrity measurements. So at the end, the way you use to confirm that you deserve these credits is validation, permanent validation, as you were just saying, once a day. I have to congratulate you because I haven't heard from you or Shane any complaint about Sacramento regulators. In our country, usually people start complaining and say, we have to do it, but you just do it. If you want to be in business, this is the way to go. And I'm so happy to see that you have coordinated with sanitation in order to get a very good effort, in spite of the very limited LRV that you are getting. For our audience, when you say that secondary treatment accounts for only 0.7 LRV, that means the microbiological inactivation is just about half, 50%, compared to 6 logs, which means 10 to the 6, 100,000 times reduction that you achieve with the membranes, and particularly with the UV. So having said that, congratulations again. You are doing a good job, and I'm really satisfied to hear the last sentence of your conclusion. You said you are so happy with indirect potable reuse. You are blessed, you said, you are blessed with such a beautiful groundwater basin that for the time being, you will just continue doing indirect potable reuse. That's my assessment. As long as you have a good environmental buffer, be it a groundwater basin or a reservoir, it certainly is easier. It's already challenging, but it's less challenging than if you want to go into the International Space Station approach. 98% recovery. So, José Miguel, the floor is open for questioning.
Sí, Rafael, tenemos varias cuestiones. La primera sería de Cristian Páez, que nos pregunta que si hay él dice, pienso que hay un porcentaje de aguas residuales que no llega a ser recuperada y reinyectada como agua subterránea. ¿Cuál es la disposición final de esa agua?
Oh, they are asking you, what do you do with the water, the wastewater that you don't finally introduce into the aquifer? I know the answer, but you can provide that.
Sure. No, good question. Yeah. With the final expansion of the facility coming online this year, we're recycling what we consider all of the reclaimable flow that comes to the sanitation district that is fortunately located right next door to us. And so the water that's non-reclaimable, as well as the concentrate from our reverse osmosis process, those are discharged through the sanitation district's ocean outfall, which goes approximately 5 miles offshore of Orange County into the Pacific Ocean, and so they discharge that under permits from the state of California and also from federal EPA. The way many coastal communities discharge secondary effluent to the ocean. So that's where anything that's not recycled remains for ocean discharge here.
Good.
Sí, Rafael, nos pregunta también Nicolás que si existe un valor de carbono orgánico total que garantice que se cumplen los niveles de eliminación requeridos.
Did you get the question, Jason? Is
Yes.
there any total organic carbon limit that satisfies the requirements of the state?
Right. Good question. Yeah, Shane and I didn't touch on that much, but the total organic carbon requirements here are typically as a bulk surrogate for organics removal, right? And there is a requirement that our finished water, because we're doing direct injection with some of it, the state of California still maintain its 0.5 milligram per liter limit for that. But we have found, based on the TOC in our influent from the sanitation district, and the excellent performance of the modern, thin film composite polyamide reverse osmosis membranes, we can pretty consistently achieve an RO permeate and final effluent quality of about less than 0.1 milligrams per liter, very consistently. We can verify that essentially in almost real time with online TOC analyzers. And as I mentioned, so we can pretty easily achieve the 0.5, and we actually like to be able to show more than that, right? Because our pathogen credit is currently based upon the TOC. So the more reliable, more sensitive measurement we can get, that's the real driver. And so if we start having a TOC issue, the first issue we have to deal with is that it's not allowing us to prove our pathogen removal, right? We worry about that even before, we hit sort of that 0.5 organics limit. It becomes almost more of an important thing, at least for in a regulatory sense, on the pathogen side of things. But yeah, we found we're able to meet our TOC requirements using reverse osmosis without too much difficulty.
Good.
Sí, Rafael, nos pregunta Inés que cuál sería el coste de producción por metro cúbico aproximado de agua IPR en sus instalaciones.
Okay, that's an easy one, Jason. What is your current cost of production for cubic meter?
Yes, and I've been remiss, Rafael. I have not done the conversion to
I can tell you now.
cubic meters, so I'll have to get that back to you. I I can tell you in sort of our very unique Western United States units of the acre foot, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and perhaps you can translate for that for your colleagues, or I certainly can provide you the translated number perhaps after the webinar. But right now, I'll give you two numbers. When the project first came online in 2008, we were able to produce the water out of the facility considering the unit cost of water was roughly $450 per acre foot. Now, there's some important caveats to that in terms of the capital investment to build the facility, as you know, half of that was paid by our partner at the sanitation district, right? So we didn't have the entire debt burden for that. And we also received a small operating subsidy, right, to help cover that. So that's an important caveat for that number. What that number is today, after a couple expansions, which we paid for the water district all of ourselves, so we're servicing all the debt. We no longer get the operating subsidy for the 500,000 cubic meter per day facility. Our production costs and changes in energy costs, chemical costs, we're closer to about $850 an acre foot now to produce the water today.
Okay, let me complement that. Just for our audience to make the calculation,
sure.
An acre foot is just about 1,234 cubic meters. So you divide dollars, and the final result of this number, $850 per acre foot, is just about $0.55 per cubic meter, which means 55 cents per cubic meter. I understand that includes the power and the expense to bring the water to Anaheim, 21 kilometers. Okay.
Yes, you're correct.
And if I may complement Jason figures, complement it with a question: what is the current cost of imported water when there is water available?
Sure. Rafael, the current cost of treated imported water, so again, water that's been conveyed to Southern California and then receives the drinking water filtration and disinfection such that it can be distributed directly to homes and businesses. The current cost of that right now is approximately $1,200 an acre foot. So about roughly 50% more than our current cost.
So I take that those numbers to illustrate to our audience that the water you produce is just about 850 compared to 1,200, 1,200. And that's really a motivation, other than the fact that at some point in time, that water from the aqueduct was not available. So it was not a question of 1,200 or 1 million. You couldn't buy the water because the water was not available. So.
Rafael, vamos con otra pregunta de Carlos Montero, que nos dice que aunque la intención de la compañía de Jason no es ir de momento a DPR, ¿cómo está siendo la experiencia de DPR en San Diego y más a largo plazo en Los Ángeles? ¿Está la compañía de Jason involucrada en estas experiencias?
There's a question about what is your experience in the southern part of California about DPR, but I will have to correct the question. There's no such a DPR process so far as I know. The only thing they do is you are doing groundwater recharge. San Diego is doing surface water augmentation. In other words, using the San Vicente Reservoir as a way to mix the water and then distribute. So what do you think it will take for this direct potable reuse to get moving, implemented by someone?
Sure. Yeah, and this might be something Shane might want to weigh in on too, because I know he's working with a lot of the utilities who are considering these types of projects for DPR. I think there's a lot of momentum now. I think my understanding is some of the subsequent phases in San Diego. Right now, they're building their reservoir augmentation project that Shane mentioned will be online in 2025. I think they have subsequent phases of potable reuse there that may involve some smaller reservoirs, such that those they won't get the 2 months of time in the reservoir. It might be so small that the state will consider them DPR. but they're proceeding with those. I think those seem pretty likely to me. And there's a couple large projects in Los Angeles that Shane might have mentioned, whether it's the Hyperion project from City of Los Angeles or the Pure Water Southern California project that's being planned by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and Los Angeles County Sanitation District. They're planning projects that are comparable in size to our current facility, if not larger. And I think, Rafael, what they're trying to do is initially build them such that they can do a little bit of IPR initially, but that they can either through satellite treatment or other things do DPR in select locations as they distribute the water closer to a drinking water plant or otherwise. And so I think they're trying to figure out right now sort of the order and the right level of flexibility such that they can eventually, a single central facility can support both IPR and DPR to give them a lot of flexibility.
But if I may ask, before I return to the person that made the question, the time frame for those projects is 2035, right?
That is the City of Los Angeles' goal for Hyperion, and I believe the Pure Water Southern California project has a sort of a similar goal and timeline. Yes.
José Miguel.
Sí, Rafael.
Le pregunto a Carlos Montero si la respuesta ha satisfecho su pregunta.
De acuerdo, sino que nos la amplíe. Voy con otra pregunta de Noelia, ya estamos en las dos últimas. Noelia Crespo nos pregunta que qué papel juegan los atascos o las obstrucciones de los pozos de inyección en el porcentaje de virus y bacterias en el agua.
Oh, the question is, the injection wells maybe have to be cleaned up. That process may interfere or disturb the efficiency of the removal of viruses or bacteria. What would be the consequences of that cleaning process of the injection wells?
Yeah. So our cleaning process for the injection wells, we found even though we're injecting very high purity water, eventually just wells seem to clog. Whether that's maybe a little bit of carryover from the post-treatment process with, we add lime to the water to stabilize it, add some alkalinity. We find we have to backflush certain wells with a dedicated pump that reverses that flow, sometimes as at least once a week at some of those. Others can go more like a month or two without being reversed or longer. It's very site specific. It depends on the local geology. Depends a little bit on the well construction. So each well is a little bit different. I don't think we have not observed any issue with backwashing affecting the microbiological quality of what we inject. We have not observed that having an impact on it. And given that we're going through the dual membrane process and we're doing the UV here, it's pretty high purity water. And we talked about TOC. The TOC is so low, right, that we don't really feel like we get any biofouling of the well, right? There's no food, right, for the bugs to grow, and so to the extent we have to backflush the wells, it's really based on like perhaps particulate plugging, but not biofouling. We have not observed any biofouling issues with our wells since we've been, for the last 15 years with GWRS.
Good. José Miguel.
Sí, Rafael, ya finalizamos con esta pregunta, nos la hace Luis Albarracín, además una pregunta muy interesante, que dice que ¿cuántos ciclos de recirculación tiene el agua de consumo en California?
Did you get it, Jason?
You can translate. I think so, but you should just make sure I got it.
How many cycles of reuse has the water in California? How many times people use the same molecule of water over time?
Right. Yes, it's a great question. It's probably a very location-specific assessment. I mean, certainly, I know folks have looked at, even just kind of stepping back from Southern California, even looked at the Colorado River system, just the normal Colorado system, right, where the water starts in Colorado and Utah, comes down to Las Vegas, right? Las Vegas uses a lot of that water and puts all their effluent back into the lake upstream in Lake Mead. So there's certainly some, there's reuse going on there. So even in the imported supply, that's occurring. Yeah, it'd be interesting to say that. I mean, I would, one way to think about it here is the nearest couple of wells to us where we do our work here in Orange County is the closest well is about 6 months of travel, right? So if you are a consumer served by that well, you could be seeing the same water every
6 months,
6 to 12 months, right? Could be coming back to you through that process. Yeah.
Good answer. José Miguel, ¿alguna otra pregunta?
Nada más, te doy paso y aquí podemos cerrar, Rafael.
Well, thank you to our audience for the very interesting questions. Of course, they can access the web pages of Orange County Water District. There is plenty of information. Of course, they can also access ASERSA webpage. We have presentations by Jason, by Mehul, a colleague of Jason, in which most of those topics have been considered. And again, I would like to thank Jason for his comprehensive and wonderful presentation of a reality. As I said, I have to congratulate them for all they do, because the least you can say is that the profession of water reclamation in those conditions is really a very challenging profession, very risky. You really have to do a wonderful job. And I really encourage them for plenty of success in the new initiative, the initiative of Trussell and Jason Dadakis about implementing this validation process, establishing the documents by which you can assign a removal credit, what they call credit for removal, to any specific treatment. But again, I will try to... perdón, estoy hablando a nuestros... Okay. In any case, I want to congratulate Jason and Shane, because once they do that, we'll be able to kind of assign immediately those numbers to any treatment we propose. However, the important point they both indicated is you have to effectively monitor in order to make sure that you are achieving those numbers. The state apparently does not believe you until you demonstrate every day that you are operating the facilities as expected. So the numbers don't come automatically. You have to win your credits every day. Thank you, José Miguel, por tu colaboración, por presentárnosla, por ofrecernos esta plataforma, ofrecernos toda la ayuda posible, y como tú bien les vas a comentar a nuestra audiencia, los documentos estarán disponibles en la página web, tanto de aguasresiduales.info, y dentro de un día o 2 días, de 48 horas, estarán también disponibles las presentaciones audiovisuales, visuales, mejor dicho, en este caso, en la página web de ASERSA. Miguel.
Efectivamente. Bueno, pues aquí nos despedimos. Así será, como decía Rafael, a partir de mañana estará disponible en nuestra web. La presentación también os llegará por correo electrónico, por si queréis verla de nuevo, o los que no han estado en el directo, que lo puedan ver en diferido, tanto lo que es el diferido, como podrás descargar la información mañana, como os decía, en nuestra web. Y sin nada más, nos despedimos. Darle las gracias al doctor Shane y a Jason. El próximo evento será en el mes de diciembre, ¿verdad, Rafael?
Estamos preparando. No es fácil preparar y convocar a personas de la valía de los 2 presentadores que hemos tenido hoy, pero vamos a intentar. Si lo podemos hacer, lo anunciaremos lo antes posible, y si no fuera posible, en cualquier caso, ya les anticipo a todos unas felices fiestas, un buen fin de año y lo mejor para el año que viene. Quizá también decirles que miren la página web de Aguas Residuales Info y en la nuestra, porque a partir de mañana lanzaremos esta campaña de promoción de la calidad de la regeneración del agua, con unos paneles que gustosamente ASERSA ofrecerá a todos los que están involucrados en la reutilización. De modo que a partir de mañana podrán acceder a la información e informarse y participar si lo consideran conveniente. Gracias, José Miguel.
Pues nada, gracias, Rafael. Hasta pronto. Gracias a todos y un saludo.
Saludos, Jason y Shane. Gracias por todo.